Hello, sports fans. Welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my Week 10 college football predictions. So last week in Week 9, I had a pretty good week going 15-4, and that brings my record on the season to 135-34. But kicking things off this week with the one game we have on Friday, and that is Memphis at Rice. So Memphis is coming in off a huge win over South Florida, and they're in a great spot to make the college football playoff as that group of 5 team. But they didn't avoid a letdown here, obviously after their big win, and they don't face a Rice team that isn't great as they're 4-4. But the offense for Memphis, they've been great. They're putting up 37 points per game, and they really lead on the run with 210 rushing yards per game. And I think Memphis is going to have a great offensive game this week because the Rice defense isn't great, allowing 28 points per game, over 150 yards per game on the ground. And then on the flip side, Rice also isn't very good, as they're scoring just 22 points per game, and they don't face a good Memphis defense, holding opponents to 19 points per game. But this game is a pretty good matchup for Memphis. I think they win this game pretty easily, and they beat Rice by a score of 38-14. Up next, we have Penn State at Ohio State. This is a game that coming into the season was supposed to be a game between two national title contenders and two top 5 teams. But instead, we have one elite team in Ohio State, and they play a Penn State team that's lost 4 straight, and they might not even get to a bowl game. But Penn State, they do still have some talent, so maybe they can make this game interesting. But the offense for Ohio State, they've been great, especially through the air, as they're scoring 36 points per game and averaging nearly 280 passing yards per game. And they now face a Penn State defense that isn't playing that well, as they're allowing nearly 30 points per game on their 4-game losing streak, but they are still good against the pass, allowing just 145 passing yards per game, which is still top 5 in the country. And then on the flip side, the offense for Penn State isn't great, as in Big Ten play, they're putting up just 26.5 points per game, and obviously they're without Drew Allar, who's out for the rest of the year. And the Penn State offense, they now face the number 1 scoring defense in the country, as Ohio State allowing just 6 points per game. But this is a game that could be good because obviously both teams are extremely talented. Penn State was ranked top 5 to start the season for a reason. They just haven't played like it. But I'm going to take Ohio State to get the win here. I think they dominate this game and win 34-6. Although it would be hilarious if Penn State wins their first big game without James Franklin. Up next, we have Vanderbilt at Texas. So Vanderbilt, they're playing well as they're 7-1. And then they'll head to Texas to face a Texas team that's 6-2. Although they're not playing that well, as they've needed overtime to win their last 2 games against Kentucky and Mississippi State. And those are 2 of the worst teams in the SEC. But I think this game should be pretty good. On the offensive side of the ball for Vanderbilt, they've been playing well, scoring 38.4 points per game, and they have a great run game with over 200 rushing yards per game. But they don't face a Texas defense that is one of the best in the country, on 14.6 points per game and just 81 rushing yards per game. Although the Texas defense isn't amazing against the pass, and they just allowed over 380 passing yards last week, so I could see Diego Pavia having a big game through the air. And then on the offensive side for Texas, they've been pretty disappointing so far this year, scoring 29 points per game, but they did score 45 last week. Although Texas, they might be without Arch Manning, who is currently dealing with a concussion, and he's questionable, and if Arch Manning can't play, then backup quarterback Matthew Caldwell will get the start. But whoever gets the start at quarterback for Texas, they'll match up against a good Vanderbilt defense that has long just 18.8 points per game. But this is a really tough game to predict, and I think this is going to be a lower scoring defensive game because obviously both teams are great defensively. And I would lean towards Texas because they are at home, but they haven't been playing that well, and they might be playing their backup quarterback. But I'm still going to take Texas. I'm not that confident in them getting the win, but I'm going to take Texas to get the win in a close, low-scoring game, 23-17. Moving on, we have Miami at SMU. Miami is 6-1 and coming in off a nice bounce-back win over Stanford, and SMU is 5-3, although they're very inconsistent. And this is also the first time all year that Miami is playing outside of the state of Florida. It's only their second road game, and their first road game was at Florida State. And considering it's November, that is kind of crazy. But this game should be pretty interesting. On the offensive side of the ball for Miami, they've been great, scoring 34 points per game, and they face an SMU defense that is allowing 21 points per game, and they're elite stopping the run, although they can't stop anybody through the air, allowing over 300 passing yards per game. Although something to note, the SMU defense is very good at forcing interceptions, as they have 12 picks this year, which is tied for 4th most in the country, and that could be trouble for Carson Beck, who definitely can be turnover prone at times. And then on the other side, the SMU offense has been very up and down, as they're scoring 31.4 points per game, although last time out against Wake Forest, they only put up 12. And then they'll have to face a Miami defense that is allowing 14.4 points per game. But this is a tougher game to predict because the upset is definitely a possibility, especially because SMU's at home, and this game is in November, and Mario Cristobal is just 4-8 at Miami in the month of November. But I don't think this is going to be an easy game for Miami. I am going to take them to get the win because I don't trust SMU with how inconsistent they are. But an upset is definitely possible, but I've got Miami with the win 27-21. Next game we have West Virginia at Houston. So Houston, they're actually pretty good. They're 7-1 and they got a nice win over Arizona State last week. And then they'll face a bad West Virginia team that's 2-6 and winless in conference play. But this game I don't really think is going to be that good. The offense for Houston isn't great, scoring only 28 points per game, but I really don't think they have much to worry about this week against a terrible West Virginia defense that's allowing about 30 points per game. And they've also allowed at least 38 in 4 of their last 5 games. And then on the flip side, the West Virginia offense isn't great. They're only scoring 21 points per game, and the Houston defense is quite good. But I don't really think Houston's got a ton to worry about here. I've got Houston with the win pretty easily by a score of 37-16. Moving on, we have Louisville at Virginia Tech. So Louisville's playing pretty well as they're 6-1, and then they'll face a Virginia Tech team that's 3-5. And this is another game I really don't think is that great. Louisville's been great offensively, scoring about 35 points per game, and they face a bad Virginia Tech defense that's allowing 29.9 points per game. And then on the flip side, it's also quite one-sided. Virginia Tech, they're only scoring 25 points per game, and Louisville's pretty good defensively, allowing 21 points per game. So I don't have a ton to say about this game. I think Louisville wins pretty easily, 35-20. Next game, we have Indiana at Maryland. So Indiana, they're great as they're 8-0, and then if it's a Maryland team that got off to a great start as they were 4-0, but now they're 4-3, and they've lost 3 games in a row. But I think this is going to be another tough game for Maryland. On the offensive side of the ball, they have some talent, and I really like quarterback Malik Washington, who's been great for them so far as a true freshman. But I just don't think Maryland's going to have a ton of offensive success as they face a great Indiana defense that is allowing just 10 points per game. And then on the flip side, the Maryland defense has been solid, allowing only 17 points per game, but they don't have to try to stop one of the nation's highest scoring teams, as Indiana is scoring 45.4 points per game, which is third highest in the country. Well, I think Maryland can keep this close for a while, but in the end, Indiana's just way too good. They pull away and take control of this game, and I've got Indiana with the win 36-16. Up next, we have Georgia against Florida in Jacksonville. This is going to be pretty interesting. Georgia, they're 6-1, and Florida's 3-4. You would think it's going to be a blowout, but it's a rivalry game, and these games are usually pretty close. For Florida, it's going to be their first game since firing Billy Napier, and maybe they can get a spark, because sometimes firing a coach can do that for a team. But this game is still kind of one-sided. On the offensive side of the ball for Georgia, they've been good, scoring 33.7 points per game, but the Florida defense has also played well, as they're allowing 20 points per game. And I also could see the Florida defense playing well, because Georgia's offense has struggled against good defense, as they only put up 21 against Alabama and 20 against Auburn. And then on the flip side, the offense for Florida is not good. They still haven't scored 30 points against the FBS team, and they're scoring just 22.4 points per game on the season. And then they'll face a great Georgia defense, allowing 19.5 points per game. But anything can happen here because it's a rivalry game, but I'm going to take Georgia to get the win. It's the better overall team, and they've also dominated this series, winning 7 of the last 8 games. So I'm going to take Georgia with the win in a lower scoring game by a score of 24-10. Next game, we have Notre Dame at Boston College. Notre Dame is 5-2 and coming off a bye after a big win over USC. And they face the Boston College team that is not good, as they're 1-7. And they've lost 7 games in a row, and their one win was against an FCS team. But this game is not going to be very close. The Notre Dame offense is great, scoring 39.1 points per game, and they're going to have an absolute field day this week against a terrible BC defense that is allowing 34.4 points per game. Plus, they can't stop the run, and they just allowed over 300 rushing yards last week. So I think Jeremiah Love and this Notre Dame run game are going to have a huge game. And then the offense for Boston College, they're also not great, as they're scoring 27 points per game, and they face a Notre Dame defense that's consistently improving, allowing just 21.3 points per game. But this game is not going to be close. I've got Notre Dame winning easily 42-14. Up next, we have Texas Tech at Kansas State. This one could be interesting. Texas Tech's been great, as they're 7-1, and they face a Kansas State team that's been pretty disappointing, as they're 4-4. They have been playing better as of late, winning back-to-back games and 3 of their last 4. But I think this game could be somewhat entertaining. On the offensive side of the ball for Texas Tech, they're elite. They're scoring 43.6 points per game, and starting quarterback Byron Morton is back for this week's game after he missed the last 2 games with an ankle injury. And his return is going to be a big boost to the Texas Tech offense, as he's averaging over 250 pass yards per game. And I think the Texas Tech offense is going to have a nice game, because they face a Kansas State defense that isn't very good, allowing nearly 26 points per game. And then on the flip side, the offense for Kansas State is scoring 31 points per game, and over their last 4 games, they're scoring 38 points per game. But they don't get a very tough test this week against a great Texas Tech defense that's allowing just 12.4 points per game. But while I think this game could be interesting, I'm going to take Texas Tech to get the win. I just think they're too complete of a team. I think their offense plays well and scores a lot against a bad defense. I think their defense contains a good offense. And I've got Texas Tech with the win by a score of 42-20. Up next, we have Virginia at Cal. So this is another game that could be pretty good. Cal is decent as they're 5-3, and Virginia is 7-1, although they haven't been playing that well as of late. As in their last two games, they've beaten Washington State 22-20 and North Carolina 17-16. And I definitely don't completely trust this Virginia team, and I definitely think they're beatable, and I wouldn't be shocked if that happens this week. But on the offensive side of the ball for Virginia, they've been solid, scoring 37 points per game, but obviously haven't been as good recently. And they don't face a Cal defense that isn't great but isn't terrible, allowing 24 points a game. And then on the flip side, the offense for Cal hasn't been amazing, scoring 25 points per game. They've got a very talented quarterback and true freshman, probably going to say this wrong, Jaron Kiwe Sagbatelli, and he's been very inconsistent, but he's good. And I definitely think he can have a good game against a Virginia defense that is pretty solid, but I just don't completely trust them, as they're allowing 22.4 points per game. But this is a game where I really think the upset is a possibility. Virginia already hasn't been playing that well, and now they have to go across the country to Cal. I kind of like the matchup for Cal. I like what they have offensively with JKS. And I don't trust Virginia, so I'm actually going to take Cal to get the upset win by a score of 27-24. Moving on, we have South Carolina at Ole Miss. So South Carolina, they've been very disappointing as they're 3-5, but they almost beat Alabama last week, and I think they could play a close game once again. As they now face an Ole Miss team who's 7-1 and coming off a nice win over Oklahoma. For this game, we have a very interesting matchup, as we have a great offense for Ole Miss against a good defense for South Carolina. As the offense for Ole Miss is putting up 37 points per game and 305 passing yards per game, but South Carolina's defense allowing under 21 points per game and under 200 passing yards per game. And then on the flip side, the offense for South Carolina isn't great. They're scoring just 20.4 points per game, but the Ole Miss defense also isn't amazing, allowing 23 points a game, and they've allowed at least 26 in back-to-back games. But this is another game where I could see the upset happening. If South Carolina was home, I think it's a lot more likely, but I still think it's possible. South Carolina, they got to keep this game low scoring because they don't have the offense to keep up with Ole Miss in a shootout. And I think they can keep it low scoring for a while, but I think Ole Miss pulls away eventually and wins by a score of 31-14. Next game, we have Purdue at Michigan. This is a game that's probably not going to be very close. Purdue is 2-6, and they've lost 6 straight, and Michigan is 6-2. And this game is also not a good matchup for Purdue, as their offense is not good, scoring just 23 points per game, and the Michigan defense is quite good. And then the Purdue defense is also bad, as they're allowing 28 points per game, and they can't stop the run. And that plays right into what Michigan wants to do offensively, as they're scoring 29 points per game and rushing for 220 yards per game. But I don't really think this game is that close. I've got Michigan with the win pretty easily, 35-10. Up next, we have Georgia Tech at NC State. This one's very interesting. Georgia Tech, they've been good as they're 8-0. They face an NC State team that's 4-4. And even though NC State is 4-4, I don't think this is a great matchup for Georgia Tech. Because the offense for NC State, they can score. They've got a good quarterback with CJ Bailey. They've got a good running back with Hollywood Smothers. And they're putting up about 31 points per game. And the Georgia Tech defense is solid, allowing only 20 points per game. But they're not good at stopping the run, allowing 155 rushing yards per game. And then on the flip side, the Georgia Tech offense is putting up 36 points per game. And they run the ball well with 230 rush yards per game. And then they'll face an NC State defense that allows a lot of points, allowing 30 per game. And they're decent against the run, although they cannot stop the pass. But the reason I don't think this game is a great matchup for Georgia Tech is they're not built to win a shootout. And I think this game could become one. Because the NC State offense, I think they're going to be able to score, even against a pretty good defense. And I could see them outscoring Georgia Tech, but with how bad the NC State defense is, I'm still going to take Georgia Tech to get the win. I think it's close, and it could go either way, but I've got Georgia Tech with the win, 34-30. Up next, we have Oklahoma at Tennessee. This is a pretty good game, and this game is pretty much a playoff elimination game, with both teams already having 2 losses. And this is also another game we have a great matchup, as we have a great Tennessee offense against a great Oklahoma defense. As the offense for Tennessee is putting up 45.6 points per game, and they're averaging 321 passing yards per game. But the Oklahoma defense is also good, as they're allowing just 12.5 points per game, and just 155 passing yards per game. Although last week against Ole Miss, they had their worst game of the season, allowing over 30 points and 300 passing yards. And then on the offensive side for Oklahoma, they've been okay, scoring 28.4 points per game, and they face a bad Tennessee defense that is giving up 30.9 points per game. And Tennessee, they've also allowed 30 in 4 straight games. But this is another tough game to predict because it's strength versus strength, and I do think Oklahoma matches up slightly better, but I'm going to take Tennessee to get the win. I think this game's going to be a shootout. I trust their offense more, plus they're at home. So I'm going to take Tennessee to get the win in a pretty entertaining game by a score of 35-31. Next game, we have USC at Nebraska. USC is 5-2 and coming off a bye after their loss to Notre Dame, and Nebraska is 6-2. And in this game, we have another great matchup, as we have a great USC passing offense against a great Nebraska pass defense. As the offense for USC putting up 42.4 points per game and averaging 326 passing yards per game. But Nebraska's defense, they're allowing just 19.6 points per game, and they're second best in the country, giving up just 127 passing yards per game. And on the flip side, the offense for Nebraska also relies on throwing the football, as they're averaging over 270 passing yards per game and scoring 35 points per game. And they face the USC defense that's allowing about 23 points per game, and they're solid against the pass, allowing 228 yards per game through the air. But this is another game that I definitely think could go either way, and I would give the edge to Nebraska because they're at home, but Nebraska, they haven't beaten a ranked team since 2016, so I'm going to take USC. And I've got USC in a pretty close game, 28-24. And our final game, we've got Cincinnati at Utah. And this is another good game, as we have Cincinnati who's 7-1 against Utah who's 6-2. On the offensive side of the ball for Cincinnati, they're led by a great quarterback in Brendan Thorsby, who's played really well with 27 total touchdowns and just 1 interception. And he leads a Cincinnati offense that has a great balance between the run and the pass, and they're averaging 38.3 points per game. But they faced a good Utah defense that is holding opponents to just 14.3 points per game. And on the other side of the offense for Utah, they've also been great. And they're also led by a dynamic quarterback, as Devin Dampier has 17 total touchdowns and just 4 interceptions. Although Dampier didn't play last week due to injury, but he is good to go for this week's game. And the offense for Utah, they're built around running the football, as they're rushing for 267 yards per game and scoring 38.9 points per game. And they face a Cincinnati defense that isn't the best, allowing 19 points per game, and they're not good against the run, allowing 141 rushing yards per game. But this is another tough game to predict, and another game that could go either way. But I've got Utah with the win here. I think they run the football pretty effectively against a defense that can't really stop the run, and I think their defense is good enough to contain a high-scoring offense. Plus, Utah's at home. So I'm going to take Utah to beat Cincinnati in a close game, 26-23. Well, those are my Week 10 college football predictions. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible. Be sure to check out the community tab of my channel, where you guys can vote on who you think on some of these big games. But that's all for this video. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.